Who is the most intelligent justice on the U.S. Supreme Court? Debbie and I were talking about this, and probably most conservatives would give the answer Clarence Thomas. He is the outstanding justice. He's certainly been there the longest. And so he has seniority. He's also a terrific justice and very bold in his thinking. But I would have to say that if I had to pick a single justice who intellectually stands a little bit above everyone else, it is Samuel Alito. His decisions are so powerfully written. And why are they so powerfully written? Well, it's partly because he doesn't just content himself with looking at, this is what the Constitution says, and this is what I'm deciding. Because as Alito rightly points out, you can have a constitutional situation where the language itself can be interpreted one way, but the intention of the framers or even the history of the meaning of that clause is completely different. A really good example, the 14th Amendment, equal protection under the laws, was established in order to protect racial minorities. Everybody is equal under the law. It didn't have anything to do with sex or with gender or with sex roles. And yet, if you just say equal treatment of the laws, then that can be automatically applied even to areas it was never intended to apply. Well, it applies to equality between, let's say, adults and children. No, it doesn't. It wasn't about that. It applies to male and female on the transgender issue. No, it doesn't. It's not even about that. So Alito's point is that you have to look at the text of the Constitution, the intention of the framers, and the history that attends the meaning of that particular clause. Why was it passed? Now, so Alito's opinions have this kind of combination. Recently, Alito was interviewed by the Wall Street Journal. He spoke very candidly about some of the other justices. Now, the part of his statements that is being talked about is where he talks about ethics and ethics requirements for the court. And Alito, again, is very sort of frank. He goes, I know this is a controversial view, but I'm willing to say it. No provision in the Constitution gives them the authority to regulate the Supreme Court, period. Now, what is Alito saying? He's saying in a system that is based upon separation of powers, where you want an independent judiciary, and the Congress and the president should not be able to have a leash on the court, because then they can intimidate the court. And why do you think the left wants all these ethics guidelines? They want to tame the court. They want to teach the court a lesson. They want to impose legislative restrictions on the court. And Alito's point is, where's the constitutional authority to do that? Where does the Constitution say that Congress gets to oversee the operations of the court? So Alito's not saying we don't want ethics. He's not saying we don't want ethics guidelines. He's saying the issue is who establishes those ethical guidelines. So, for example, who establishes the ethical guidelines for Congress? Answer, Congress. Congress establishes its own ethical guidelines, so Congress regulates itself. Well, why can't the court regulate itself? This is Alito's point. Not that you can't have ethical regulations, but the ethical regulations would need to be internal. The court is an independent branch and can establish its own rules for how it's going to function. So this is the part that's been sort of debated and is being argued about. But I find it also interesting that Alito offers a couple of really interesting comments about his colleagues. He talks about Clarence Thomas and how Clarence Thomas's approach is essentially informed by a kind of let's look at the principle of this particular case and let's not worry too much about precedent. So the issue of so-called stare decisis, what the court decided before, is not so important for Clarence Thomas. He would happily overrule precedents that he thinks are wrong. And for this reason, Thomas is often a dissenter on the court. Even in a conservative court, you sometimes have Thomas kind of way out there by himself because the other justices are less willing to overrule precedent. Even in for example, the Dobbs case, where the court overruled Roe versus Wade, it made it pretty clear that we're not attacking the contraception cases. It distinguished the abortion cases from other cases. Another point that Alito makes, and this time about Justice Roberts, is he says that Justice Roberts is a consensus guy. He doesn't like to be in the minority, so he tries to find a way that he can vote with the majority. And this is very much in keeping with what we know about Justice Roberts, the fact that Justice Roberts is a kind of coalition builder. So you've got a coalition builder, Justice Roberts, on the one side. You've got Justice Thomas, perhaps at the other extreme. And in the middle, a stalwart intellectual force on the court, one Samuel Alito. MyPillow has its 20th year anniversary, over 80 million MyPillows sold, and Mike Lindell at MyPillow wants to thank each and every one of you by giving you the lowest price in history on his MyPillows. You get a queen-size MyPillow for $19.98, regular price $69.98, and just $10 more for a king size. You get deep discounts on all the MyPillow products.